everybody, and welcome to another exciting academic edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. They're not all academic. I have comics folks on, I have young adult novelists on, all of those kind of things. But always excited when I have a colleague, someone from the world of the PhDs and the fancy robes and the doctoral TAMs jumping on. And that is Dr. Dani Kachorsky. Dr. Dani, welcome. Should I
Thank
call you Dr. Dani? Is that
Danny's fine.
okay? All right.
I'm
My
really
students
excited.
do call me Dr. D now, which
Oh,
is
do
it's
they?
kind of
Mine
fun.
call me
Yeah.
Dr. K or just Doc. That's kind of my favorite one. Like they do the what's up Doc thing all the time.
Oh
So
yeah. Yeah, I get that too. More from like people that I teach with though, which is kind of fun. And I'm just glad that they call me something. It's nice to be called something
that a
polite.
page.
Now, I also understand this is a family episode. Today is my dad's 78th birthday, and I believe your dad is also joining us. Is that right?
Yeah, he's
Somewhere.
hanging out. He is curious about the podcasting process and is going to be helping me edit my own podcast, Reading in the Gutter, shameless self-promotion, which will be relaunching sometime in the fall.
Yeah, yeah. You and I met 2019, right before the pandemic, at the LRA Comics and Graphic Novels SIG something. Is that what it's called?
It's a
Something like
study
that.
group, I think. I don't think
Yeah.
they're gigs
Oh,
at
they're
LA.
not SIGs. That's right. That's
It's
right.
the study group, which is run by Sergio Spatsakis and I think at the time David Lowe.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's right.
the three of us organized it. And yeah, I met a lot of really great people through that. So if anybody goes, like they should definitely check it out. It's always a good time.
Yeah. And that, I will be honest, I've not found LRA to be that friendly of a conference. So if you're an academic out there and you're listening, like the big like outer shell of the conference to me feels weird, but I love the study group. That's a very friendly group of people. And you kind of have to find those little pockets of
Yeah,
like-minded folks in places like
totally
that.
agree. Like there's
Yeah.
there's definitely some like groups within the group that are
Yes. Yeah, definitely, definitely. So I have a couple of questions that we can talk through, but we can also just kind of meander through whatever you would like. I don't know that the questions are really necessarily good questions, but yeah, I was gonna say after the LRA conference when we met, I hopped on the Zoom call with you to do the reading in the gutter, reading in the gutter, relaunching soon. Um, and we just have continued to connect over things that we've written together. And you've been nice enough to say yes to some invitations, including like a pandemic edited book that I was putting together. I started it right before the pandemic, and then the pandemic fell, and I was like, "What? What am I?" And you held on through that process, so I appreciate that. And yeah, it's
to
just
do while we were all shut down. Like I think I was some of my most writing productive during the
mhm.
pandemic because I was locked alone in my house and very, very bored. So
Yes. That's that scene in The Shining when Jack is just kind of leaning over the keyboard, like all work and no play, all work and no play. That's totally, yeah. I think I wrote like I don't even know
yeah,
how
it was
much
a
I
lot.
wrote. Yeah, but it was something to do, so there was that. Yeah. So you've made a career, you've fashioned a life out of teaching and comics and multimodal texts. And I think the first kind of question that I wanted to throw out, it's not a kind of question, it is an actual
It's a
question.
question.
It is a question. Yeah. Um, is what's the thing that you would probably share with teachers that kind of bubbles to the surface of your work from the past decade?
Hmm. So I think there would be two things. I think the kind of the overarching thing, because I am not just a comic scholar. I as you mentioned, I'm a multimodality scholar.
Mhm.
Um, for those of you who don't know the term, um, what that means, it's a fancy word for basically saying that most communication is a multitude of different channels or types. So like I'm having this conversation right now with you, Jason, and we're using like audio, obviously, like oral
Mhm.
language. Um, but I'm also for whatever reason, I don't know if you're going to video record this and put it on, but I'm still talking with my hands. Like there's a lot of gesturing, right?
Gesture. Yeah. Yeah.
And facial expressions and those sorts of things. So between gesture, facial expressions, and oral language, this is a multimodal communication. And then you're going to present this potentially as a single audio file, which might have music or a video, or however you do your editing process, which adds even more and more layers. And so I think the biggest takeaway for me as when I was a doctoral student and kind of moving into the academic world is just really, I mean, almost every form of communications that humans do is multimodal. And we need to help students at every level kind of understand how to navigate that.
Yeah.
So like we spend a lot of time in particular in English language arts thinking about prose, right? But we almost do that, in my opinion, at the detriment of communicating in other ways.
Yeah.
And kind of push that maybe onto other like fields or avenues. And in today's world, especially I think after the pandemic, where so little socialization and communication occurred for the youngest in our population, we need to find ways to incorporate all of these modes of communication and all of these multimodal texts and support their understanding, and honestly our understanding, I think.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah.
so that would be
That,
my first thing.
mhm.
As far as comics go, and it breaks my heart a little bit to say this, because I am a big believer in comics in the classroom and graphic novels in the classroom. But you, like anything else with education, it's not a magic bullet.
Absolutely not.
And this is one of the articles that I actually wrote with you as an editor for Study and Scrutiny kind of gets to this point of like a lot of teachers will come to me and be like, okay, I'm going to do comics. It's going to make the kids love reading again, or like they're just going to magically comprehend things. And it's like, no, like they're actually very complex texts. And while they may engage some kids because some kids love them already,
Yeah.
some kids don't have that experience, and it can be incredibly challenging for them to read. I currently have one student who has dyslexia, and he really struggled with comics because the font that is used is not dyslexia friendly. And it's all caps, right? So like he has gotten accustomed to prose, which is a more of a combination of uppercase and lowercase, and he's kind of trained himself to read that. But he has really struggled with that, and has been very like thoughtful, I think, in his struggle. And we've kind of like been talking about it, and he's actually in a research study that I'm doing right now. And he
Nice.
plans to talk about these things at length when we do his final interview. It's like, I have so many things I want to tell you.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And
So yeah.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's great that you found the support to continue doing research, and great also that you have the time and the balance to do that. As a classroom teacher, once upon a time, and we might talk about this a little bit more on your podcast as well. I found it challenging to have those times to write, and now I think it's ingrained in me so much that I can't not do it. In addition to all the things that you do as a teacher, so it's great that you're continuing to do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've gotten really lucky with where I'm working right now. I'm at a private Jesuit school that really values academic, not just like academics for students, but they value like academic backgrounds for their teachers. Like there's a lot of people with terminal degrees on campus, and like we have research classes. I'll actually be teaching one of those coming up here. And so like the reason why I'm able to do the research is like they didn't have a problem approving it. Like having been a researcher trying to get into schools, like I know how hard it is sometimes to get a district or admin to approve it. But they saw the value in it. And but they did ask me like, okay, that's great, but you have to collaborate with the students. So like on this research project that I'm currently doing with Stephanie Reed, we actually have, I think it's like a team of maybe 6 or 7 high school students who are actually like collecting data and are going to do data analysis and help us write the paper, which I think is really fun. So
That's awesome. That is so awesome. And so I've got at least three echoes or hashtags or retweets or whatever at this point. The first being the through line that you made for multimodal communication and the importance right now because of the pandemic. I hadn't thought about it that way, of recognizing how important multimodal communication is right now. So I really like that through line that you shared.
yeah,
Also,
I
sorry, go ahead.
no, you're fine. Um, this is Zoom for you, right? I read an article recently, and I am struggling to remember like who published it. It was like New York Times or like one of those kind of outlets that I had been talking to, like CEOs and Fortune 500 company businesses talking about like Gen Zers coming up, and they're having to train them how to engage with other coworkers socially. So I think like this idea of like we need help with communicating now after the pandemic is alive, like very much alive and well. Like there's a lot of struggling out there, I think, for all of us really.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a muscle memory for me as somebody that communicated for a while, but it's the strange feeling of it almost feels like a 10-year gap. And I
Mhm.
still have those moments where it kind of hits me like I'm not wearing a mask right now. I should be wearing a mask right. Like there's that whole post or as it continues to develop, all of those things that come in that that I just keep thinking about.
Yeah, it's not gone for me at all.
No, definitely not. The other thing that you were saying that I really resonated with was this idea that there is no silver bullet. And, part of me wishes there was. I wish there
Yes.
was like this singular answer, literacy in a box. You open it, you give it to everyone, like medicine, and all of a sudden, everyone is Dostoevsky or they're just out there writing Ulysses or
Literacy.
whatever. Yeah. Um, so there's a part of me that wishes that was the case. There's also a part of me that loves the artistic problem solving nature of teaching. So I'm okay that you have to do a lot of different things to figure everything out and it's a process. But when I stepped back into a high school space this past year, I was doing this intro to myself, like these slides, as you do. You're like, hey, I'm a person. I have dogs. I have a family. And one of them was about going to a comics convention. And I had like a sketch that someone had done for me and a picture of me with the guy that created Thanos, because I guess I was going for that cool factor, like,
Sure.
hey, I met this guy. Um, and the student whose name is Anna, if you're out there and you happen on this, little shout out to Anna. The first day meeting me, she said, "We're not going to read those superhero books, are we?" I was like,
Not a
"No,
fan, huh?
yeah, not a fan." And I'm going, "No, that's if you're into it, then yes,
Go for it.
I'll bring a graphic novel. But if you're not, then that's also fine, and that's okay." So
Yeah, I
it's just that
remember
process.
when I taught high school before, so like I'm back in high school now, but when I taught before, I had done a unit on like World War II and graphic novels. So like a lot of like the old school stuff that was like basically propaganda. But to introduce it, I used picture books to kind of teach the students the visual literacy stuff. And I
Hmm.
had one student who hated that. Like she didn't mind the comics so much because she read manga, but she hated the picture books and was like deeply offended that I
Right.
was using them in class because like she's like, I'm not a kid anymore. It's like, okay, but like we can read 32 pages really quickly.
Yeah.
Read this graphic novel in like 2 seconds to like illustrate a visual literacy point. Like, sorry, I don't know what to tell you. Um, but yeah, like anything, it doesn't matter what it is. There's no like one thing that every student is going to be like all in for all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And it's part of finding the range of materials, which is what I find myself, that's the phrase I find myself using more and more when I write about this, is
Hmm.
that it's not just one type of text, it's all of these types of text and recognizing that they are texts.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and valuing that. I'm writing the intro because I'm guest editing for Study and Scrutiny right now on censorship. And I don't know that this will actually make it into my intro at this point, but I was reflecting on like when I was a kid, I didn't encounter like censorship like the way that we're kind of seeing it today, where it's like just being books are just being banned um, by school boards or districts or whatever, or government organizations. But there was a lot more of the teachers just didn't value the things that I valued.
Mhm.
So like the comics, I was often asked to like not bring those to school because they weren't school books, or even like a popular Star Wars book, which was prose and probably like 500 pages, like Timothy Zahn book. Like that was the pop culture stuff was too like non-academic. So like that kind of censorship um is was the thing that I remembered the most from when I was like in middle school and high school. And just like how much what we choose to value in English language arts or literacy has always fascinated me, because to me I'm like, let's do all of it. Like let's watch movies, let's read comics, let's listen to speeches, let's read fantasy and fiction and nonfiction, all the things.
Yeah.
But that is not every teacher or administrator's perspective.
And I would just say there's a critical component to all of that.
All of this.
Yeah. And again, a great argument for multimodality. I mean, how often in the world do you actually engage with prose only,
I
realistically?
I mean, like even a chapter book is multimodal. It's got a cover with an image on it, and
Hmm.
that image conveys a message about the content, or the genre, or whatever. Um, like, and it sends messages about like who characters are and what identities are valued. So like all of these texts can be like, I've written papers just about cover art, you know.
Yes, you have. Yes,
I've
you
done a
have.
lot of studies on that, and like you can have a very deep and critical conversation about a single image that takes hours and hours and hours to do. So
And one of the things I think people get with film is they know it as this passive form. And comics, much the same way, passive, kid-friendly form. You can actually be passive with any text too.
sure.
And you can read something just for the sake of sort of having it there and then get to the end and go, why did I read that?
Mm-hmm. It's interesting that you say that, because personally, I find prose, or at least like fiction prose, especially something that is like I'm super into, to be the most passive form of reading I do, because
Hmm.
it's so automatic for me at this point. And I mean, I can power through, I don't know, like a romance novel or something in probably like 4 hours, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, am I going to be able to like report everything back to somebody or do like a summary of the whole text or do like a critical analysis? Probably not. But I can get through it and I can enjoy it, but it's not a very active process for me. Comics and graphic novels, on the other hand, I find to actually take me a lot longer to read,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
just generally speaking, like a more active reading process for me personally. I think probably because I came to them a little bit later, like I didn't start reading comics really until middle school.
Hmm.
And the only ones I could get access to were the ones in our local library, and they only carried ElfQuest at the time.
Right.
Of all things, like none of the Marvel stuff could I find. It was ElfQuest. So shout out to Wendy and Richard Penny, because that definitely was some of my formative reading experiences. But it takes me a lot longer to look than it does to read, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, I find them to be much richer for me in that regard, because I have to slow down. I have to spend the time with the image. I have to go back and forth to make sure that I'm really getting what's going on. So for all of those kind of like comics haters out there, like they really are not just a quick and easy read. I mean, if you're starting with, I don't know, the Narwhal series, they might seem pretty like easy and straightforward, but again,
Hmm.
I can sit there and analyze that for a couple of hours too.
Yeah. Well, and the real, yeah, I won't go all into all of that, but yeah, those are really interesting books. And for anybody that
I
wants
love
to
them.
say, oh yeah, they are, and the unfolding nature across the series and all of those things. I'm gonna have Ben Clanton on sometime this summer too. He and I will chat at some point.
Color me jealous. Say hi.
Yeah, I
No
will.
idea who I am, but say hi.
You're welcome to join in.
That would be
Um, yeah, yeah. I would just excuse me. I would recommend Stuck Rubber Baby for anybody that
Mhm.
wants to consider comics as this simplistic medium, or maybe what's the other one? It was just in my brain. Unflattening, Nick
Oh yeah.
Susanna.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's like some really weird ones out there. Like I always kind of come back to Meanwhile, and there's like a sequel to that one now. Um,
Hmm.
it's just kind of got like this choose your own adventure element to it, and it's
Yeah.
just so complex. Um, and I don't know, just wonderful in its complexity and ridiculousness as well. So like the amount of genres and like form, like kind of like storytelling structures that authors and illustrators use with these things. Um, I know they're very versatile in that regard.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm checking out, I can't help but check out some of the books that you have arranged behind you. I mean, I see Watchmen back there. Speaking of comics complexity,
Yeah.
Tristan Strong is a multimodal text. That kind of world building that Kwame Mbaya does in that book. I mean, you've got those maps at the beginning. You've got the Adinkra symbols that are at the beginning of each chapter. I mean, this is really, it's a way of reading that could be found in a lot of places. That's right.
Mhm.
That's right.
Yeah, my friend Stephanie Reed, who like is one of the people that I do a lot of research and write with, she's done some work on multimodal and illustrated novels, which are like novels that combined text and image in interesting ways, but it doesn't necessarily use like the paneling structure that comics are known for.
Hmm.
Um, Chopsticks is a good example, which is kind of made from all of these found artifacts. Um, and like, I think these things kind of started with comics, and then they have kind of just branched out and like taken on a life of their own, and they're incredibly like rich
Yeah.
storytelling, and things that you couldn't do with prose alone, at least in the same way, I think.
And
So,
it's interesting when you think about it around the world. Comics are this form that's really not seen as lesser. I mean, I'm thinking about manga, I'm thinking about bande
mm,
dessinée. And I remember the first time I spoke at, this was online in Zoom, so it's not as impressive as it might have been if I'd been able to fly there, but I spoke at this comics conference that was being hosted at Cambridge. So I
ooh.
went to Cambridge in my pajamas one morning at like 4 a.m. And I mentioned the term graphic novel.
Mhm.
And there was this they were very polite, but there was a subtle pushback across the different presentations because, we even feel the need to put like this, and we being the majority of, I guess,
Mm.
the United States, like graphic novel. It's not a comic, it's a graphic novel. And they just use the term comics.
Yeah. Yeah.
It-
I mean, in my writing, that's how I tend to operate. I almost always have to have like a sentence or something in there saying like, I'm going to use the word comics to refer to all of these
Mhm.
things, comic books, comic strips, graphic novels, omnibuses, whatever the case may be. Um, and I think that just referring to the medium itself as comics makes the most sense.
Mhm.
Um, I feel like the graphic novel term, I mean, wasn't it Eisner who first used it with Contract with God?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and so I feel like kind of continuing to use the term to refer to texts that kind of call back to what he created,
Yeah,
respects the history of it. Um,
absolutely.
but I understand why other cultures and other countries think we're ridiculous in so many different ways.
Right, right. Uh,
Um,
have you found that if you don't put that sentence in that says, this is why I'm using this term, that a kindly editor will mark it and go, why are you using this term? I've found that a couple of times.
Yeah, it's almost always an editor who mentions it, and most of the time they're a much older editor who maybe isn't as quite familiar with like the medium. And then every once in a while you'll just get somebody who's like maybe more of a reviewer. It's like, okay, I don't get why you're calling it this, and I think comics are dumb anyway, so maybe you just
Mhm.
shouldn't. Like, all right, well, thanks. I guess, for
Oh
a year
yeah.
back.
Yeah, lovely. I remember the first time, and I did my dissertation about film, but I remember the first time I tried to get an article published about film as a text in a
Mm.
literacy journal. It was a major literacy journal for um, adults and adolescents, so you could probably guess which one it was. Did I give that away? A reviewer commented back, I did this, I did member checking, I did, all of these multiple forms of sort of backing myself up because I knew as a qual guy that I would run into a couple of different pushbacks. And still toward the end, I had a reviewer respond and say, I just don't know if I can trust it. And I'm going,
Wow.
okay. Right? People actually said things. It was an interview. Yeah. So
Yeah, no, it's again, it's kind of interesting to me. That just tells you like where the trends are with like what we value as like text and as literature.
mhm,
Um, and I think to your point is there's this kind of assumption that things that are popular are one easy and are passive, right? That you aren't going to be able to think critically about them. And it's like, well, there are full departments and colleges dedicated to these mediums. People wouldn't have jobs if they were as simple as you think they are. So
absolutely.
maybe give it a chance and see,
Yeah,
challenge yourself to read a little more deeply into something that is maybe not familiar to you. Like your lack
absolutely.
of familiarity does not mean that it doesn't have value.
It's a wonderful sort of punctuation mark for the interview as we're sliding into the last couple of minutes. But I also did you get the Zoom timer that was like
Yeah, I've got a little countdown clock.
oh yes. But I do want to give you the chance if there's anything else that I mentioned on the list of questions or something that wasn't on the list of questions that might be of interest to make sure to share out into the world. I'll just say I appreciate your collaboration over the years. You've invited me to speak at a couple of different events and things. I always appreciate writing with you and working with you, and
Likewise.
appreciate the teaching that you're bringing into the world as well. And it sounds like you still have a really strong and enlivening joy for it. So that's always good to hear.
Yeah, and it was actually kind of nice being back in the high school classroom. Like there's certainly some aspects of being an academic, in particular the flexibility on my time that I
Mhm.
um but being back in a classroom and actually like getting to practice what I preached as an academic is has been really fun. I will say there's been like a bit of a learning curve, so you can unlearn how to like teach high school, so you have to
Oh
like
yes.
a bit. Um, but yeah, it's been really cool. And like the thing that always kind of brings it home for me is just like when they get excited about something that we're reading. Um, and like that's the part that gives me life, right? It's like turning somebody who is says they're not a reader and that they hate reading is the worst, into somebody who actually personally like and actively goes out to find a book, whether it's a graphic novel or a prose text or whatever else, is just a delight. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. It's just kind of like enjoying getting back into it and bringing these things that I've learned into the classroom space.
Love it. Love it. And I love that transformative aspect of it. And I could segue into my own story, but we'll save that. We'll save that for the next time you and I talk about paths to literacy and being in the classroom, back in the classroom, all of those sort of things.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for having me on the show, Jason. It was really nice to see you as always, and to talk about these fun things that we like to do.
Always glad to talk with you. And as I said to Ashley DeLacqua the other day, may the conversation continue.
Absolutely. Absolutely.